Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Speak Better English Podcast.
Today's deep dive isn't just about handing you a list of words to learn. We're going to explore exactly how this specific sequence works.
Right, how the story, the phrases, the conversation, and the shadowing all come together.
Exactly. It serves as the ultimate shortcut to speaking smoothly. We want to show you how to ditch those awkward filler words, bypass all the stress, and actually sound natural.
It's basically a complete toolkit distilled into a few carefully chosen words. Each element in that title represents a really specific mental shortcut.
And those shortcuts are designed to accelerate how you process and speak English. Before we look at the action steps like learning phrases or this really intriguing concept of shadowing, we have to look at the container itself.
The container holding it all together.
Yeah. The source explicitly labels this a story-based lesson. It doesn't say grammar-based, and it doesn't say vocabulary-based. It's story-based.
And that distinction changes the entire psychological landscape for you as a learner. Choosing a narrative over a traditional list is huge.
Why is that so important, though?
Well, it's probably the most important decision the creators of this framework made. What's fascinating here is how human memory actually functions.
Okay, I use this analogy a lot. Learning English through isolated vocabulary lists is kind of like trying to navigate a brand new city by reading a list of street names.
Oh, in alphabetical order.
Exactly, in alphabetical order. You might know the names, but you have zero idea how they connect.
You're completely lost.
Right, but a story-based lesson, that's handing you a fully illustrated map. You see where the streets intersect, you see the landmarks, you understand the actual flow.
That's a great way to look at it.
But why does wrapping a language lesson inside a story make the information stick so much faster for learners?
Like I said, it comes down to our biology.
Right.
Our brains just didn't evolve to memorize abstract lists of data. Think about human history for a second.
Okay, going way back.
Way back. For tens of thousands of years, long before we had written language or textbooks, how did humans pass down complex survival information?
Oh, I see where you're going. Around a campfire.
Exactly. They told stories. How did they share cultural rules or historical events? They didn't hand out flashcards.
No, they definitely didn't. They just talked and told stories.
Right. Our brains are biologically wired to recognize, follow, and retain narrative arcs. When you hear a story, your brain automatically looks for cause and effect.
So it's looking for a logical sequence.
Yes. If person A spills their coffee, then person B gets annoyed, which naturally causes person A to apologize.
So there's this built-in momentum. The language isn't just floating around in a void, it's actively pulling you forward.
It provides absolute, unbreakable context. Let's say you try to learn a word in isolation, just from a deck of flashcards.
Which is how everyone learns in school, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. And when you do that, your brain has to build a completely new, incredibly fragile neural pathway to store that random sound.
Because it has nothing to attach to.
Exactly. But when you learn a word within a story, your brain attaches that new word to a framework you already understand. The story creates emotional hooks.
Wait, emotional hooks?
Yeah, you're just memorizing the dictionary definition of a word.
Yeah.
You're experiencing a specific scenario where that word is the only tool that can fix the situation.
I can really see how that bypasses a lot of the usual friction. If you're reading a story about someone trying to grab a barista's attention in a crowded cafe, you aren't just translating excuse me.
Right, you're actually feeling it.
Yeah, you're feeling the social tension, you're feeling the relief when the barista finally turns around. You're practically living the vocabulary.
And for a non-native speaker looking for an easy, frictionless way to learn, this narrative approach does something even more crucial.
Oh, what's that?
It lowers what linguists call the affective filter.
The affective filter. Okay, that sounds a bit academic. So what does that all mean for the listener sitting at home trying to learn?
Think of the affective filter as like a stress wall in your mind. Whenever you feel anxious, judged, or bored, this wall just goes right up.
Oh, like when you're terrified a teacher's going to call on you.
Exactly. Picture yourself back in a traditional classroom, staring at a massive table of irregular verb conjugations. The pressure to perform perfectly makes you really anxious.
And that anxiety is what raises the stress wall.
Yes. And when that wall is up, new language input literally bounces right off. It can't enter your long-term memory no matter how hard you study.
Wow. So you're essentially locked out of your own brain because you're too stressed about failing.
Right. But a story completely disarms you. It engages your imagination.
It feels more like entertainment, right? Like watching a movie or just reading a good book.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like an academic chore. Because you're relaxed and curious about what happens next, that stress wall drops.
So the language just sneaks past your defenses and gets absorbed naturally. You stop fighting the language and start following the plot.
Precisely. You're wondering if the character in the cafe is going to get their complicated drink order right.
Right, rather than sweating over whether the verb they used was in the present perfect continuous tense or whatever.
It completely transforms the learning environment from a high-pressure testing center into a comfortable living room.
Which is exactly why the source text puts story-based lesson right at the top. The narrative is the delivery vehicle.
It drives the complex language data straight past your anxieties.
Okay, so we understand why the story format is the ultimate vehicle for learning. But now we really need to look at the specific destination the source has chosen.
Right, the setting of the story.
Yeah. The entire topic and title focus exclusively on a cafe conversation and a little cafe story. And, the visual overlay confirms it again. Cafe story.
The choice of a cafe setting is absolutely deliberate. It's a highly calculated decision by the curriculum designers.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate for a minute here.
Oh, go for it.
A cafe conversation, isn't that a bit, basic?
How do you mean?
Well, let's say you, our listener, are preparing for a major corporate presentation in English. Or maybe you're navigating a really complex academic field.
Right, or you're a software engineer pitching to Silicon Valley investors.
Exactly. Why is our source grounding this ultimate fluency framework in the act of ordering a latte? It just feels like we're aiming too low.
I completely get why you'd think that. It seems basic on the surface, but it's actually a brilliant move.
Okay, convince me.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cafe is the perfect microcosm of human communication. It's a highly controlled, universally understood environment.
Right, pretty much everyone knows how a cafe works.
Exactly. And it contains every single essential element of interpersonal interaction. A cafe interaction forces you to blend two very different but very crucial types of language.
Okay, what are they?
Transactional language and social language. You have to use both seamlessly.
I think I understand social language. That's like saying hello, asking how someone is doing, that kind of thing, right?
Right. Small talk.
But what do you mean by transactional? Like physically handing over money to the cashier?
Well, yes, but linguistically, transactional language is about achieving a specific concrete outcome. You need to make a request, specify details, ask about pricing, and finalize an exchange.
Okay, that makes sense.
And social language, as you said, is about building human rapport. It's the polite tone, the pleasantries, the farewell.
So a typical cafe environment requires you to execute both of these within a span of maybe, 90 seconds?
Exactly. You're weaving between building a relationship and executing a transaction. Let's look at the flow of it.
Yeah, you step up to the counter, you offer a greeting, maybe comment on the rain outside. That's the social part.
Right, and then you state your order, which shifts into the transactional.
And then the barista asks if you want oat milk or regular milk, which requires you to clarify a specific detail. Then you ask how much it costs.
Which requires numerical comprehension. You pay, you thank them, and you wish them a good day, returning seamlessly to the social.
Oh, I see the flow now. It's actually a pretty complex dance when you break it down like that.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, to address your pushback about this being too basic for a corporate professional,
Yeah, my devil's advocate point.
right, the underlying structural skeleton required to navigate a cafe is universally transferable.
Transferable how? I mean, the vocabulary for iced coffee doesn't help me in a boardroom meeting.
The specific nouns don't, but the sentence structures do. Think about the polite phrasing you use to order a beverage or ask a clarifying question about a menu item.
Like, could you tell me if this has dairy in it?
Yes, that phrase utilizes the exact same grammatical architecture required to politely request a financial report from a colleague,
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
or to ask a clarifying question in a university seminar. The skeleton is identical.
Could you tell me if this quarter's budget includes the marketing spend? It's literally the same machine, you're just swapping out the nouns.
Exactly. The cafe scenario provides high utility, low stakes practice.
Low stakes because, well, if you mess up, it's just coffee.
Right. If you make a mistake ordering, what's the absolute worst that happens? You might get an iced coffee instead of a hot one.
That's true. The stakes are incredibly low. You aren't going to get fired.
But by practicing these structural phrases in that safe environment, you build the core competency needed for high-stakes environments.
So you're learning the rhythm of how to initiate a conversation, how to express a desire respectfully, and how to close an interaction smoothly.
And how to handle a misunderstanding without panicking.
So the little cafe story is basically a flight simulator.
I love that analogy, yes.
You master the controls here in the safety of the fake cockpit, the cafe, and then you can fly that plane into the boardroom, the hospital, or wherever your life takes you.
And the cafe is the easiest entry point because everyone in almost every culture understands the fundamental dynamic of buying a hot drink.
It relies on a totally universal script.
Exactly, because you already know the logical sequence of events. You walk in, order, pay, wait, and get your drink. Your brain doesn't have to work hard to understand the context.
You aren't trying to learn a new cultural concept while simultaneously learning a new language. The context is just second nature.
Which means you can dedicate 100% of your cognitive energy to the English itself.
Okay, we have our setting, the cafe, and we have our vehicle, the story. Now let's examine the specific instruction embedded right in the source title.
It says learn phrases.
Yes, it specifically notes story plus phrases. Notice what it heavily implies by omission, though.
Right. It doesn't say learn vocabulary words.
And it definitely doesn't say study grammar rules.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I like to compare this to building a piece of furniture.
Oh, like a bookshelf or something.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine you want a new bookshelf. Learning individual vocabulary words and grammar rules is like someone dropping off a massive pile of raw wood, a box of loose screws, and a saw in your living room.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. You have all the raw materials, sure, but you have zero idea how they fit together. You have to measure, cut, drill, and assemble everything completely from scratch.
And doing that while trying to hold a conversation.
Right. Imagine doing all that carpentry while the person you're talking to is standing right there staring at you, waiting for you to finish building the shelf.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. No wonder people get so stressed speaking a foreign language.
But learning phrases, that's like going to the store and buying a pre-assembled modular piece of furniture.
You just carry the whole module into your living room and slot it perfectly into place.
Exactly. It's ready to use immediately. You don't need the saw, you don't need the screws, you just use it.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The actual linguistic term for this modular approach is chunking.
Chunking. Okay, what does that mean technically?
Our source is directing the learner to acquire language in lexical chunks rather than as isolated individual words. A chunk is just a phrase or a group of words that naturally occur together in speech.
Like, can I get a is a chunk?
Yes, I'll have is a chunk. Could you tell me is a chunk?
But why is chunking so far superior to just learning the individual words and applying the grammar rules you learned in school? I mean, isn't it better to know how the machine actually works?
Well, because native speakers don't construct sentences word by word. It's a huge misconception in language learning.
Wait, really? We don't?
No. When a native English speaker talks, they are not consciously retrieving a noun, then calculating the correct verb tense, hunting for an adjective, and stringing them all together using grammar rules.
So what are they doing?
They're just retrieving pre-assembled chunks of language from their memory and linking those blocks together.
Wow, so it's basically an illusion. It sounds like they're building these incredibly complex thoughts from scratch, but they're really just snapping large pre-made blocks together.
Precisely. Now think about what happens when a non-native speaker tries to learn by memorizing individual words and grammar rules.
They're forcing their brain to do an immense amount of computational work in real time.
Exactly. Let's break down that mental process. First, they hear a question. Second, they have to translate that question into their native language.
Right, which takes a second.
Third, they formulate an answer in their native language. Fourth, they translate that new answer into English words. Fifth, they apply English grammar rules to those individual words to make sure the tense is right.
And finally, sixth, they actually open their mouth and speak.
Yes. And that translation lag is agonizing.
It's exhausting for the speaker, and it creates this really awkward silence in the conversation. And that exact computational delay is what causes the heavy use of filler words.
Which is exactly what our listener wants to avoid.
Right. When you hear someone saying, like, just pausing awkwardly, it's not because they aren't smart or don't know the language.
No, it's because their brain is frantically trying to saw the raw wood and drill the screws, as you put it earlier.
They are building the sentence entirely from scratch while trying to maintain the flow of conversation. Is literally just the sound of their brain buffering.
That's a great way to describe it. It's just buffering.
This directly targets the main goal of our listener. If you want to avoid filler words, if you want to sound smooth and natural, you absolutely cannot build sentences word by word. You must use phrases.
Pre-learned phrases provide what you called fluency bridges. They give your brain a moment to rest.
Let's look at a real-world example of that fluency bridge.
Okay, let's say someone asks you a really tough question at work.
If you start your sentence with a pre-learned chunk, something like, "That's a really interesting point, I think that."
Your mouth is moving, you sound perfectly fluent, and there are zero filler words.
Exactly. And your brain just bought itself 2 full seconds of free time to decide what the actual substance of the answer will be.
Which is why the source pairs story plus phrases. The story demonstrates exactly which chunks belong together in a natural context.
So you aren't guessing if "I want a coffee" sounds more natural than "I'll have a coffee." The story shows you.
You learn the phrase exactly as it sounds in the cafe. You bypass that mental translation process entirely.
You aren't learning English through the filter of your native language anymore. You're learning English exactly how it's used in reality.
It gives you an immediate, steady rhythm. You sound confident because the structural integrity of the sentence is already guaranteed.
Because you already know the phrase works perfectly. You acquired it as a complete unit. You don't have to wonder if you messed up the grammar.
This approach just respects your time and your cognitive load. By focusing on chunks, it prevents that massive mental overwhelm that causes so many learners to just give up and walk away.
Okay, so knowing the phrases and understanding how to use chunks is a huge leap forward, but it's really only half the battle, right?
Right. The title of our source module gives us 2 final, highly active commands to execute.
It says, practice conversation and shadow with us. Now, practicing conversation is straightforward enough. We all know we need to speak out loud to improve.
But let's unpack shadow with us.
Yeah, shadowing sounds almost secretive, like espionage or something a detective does in a movie. What does this actually mean for you, the listener, trying to master English?
Shadowing is perhaps the most powerful yet most underutilized technique in language learning.
Really? The most powerful?
I believe so. And this raises an important question. What is the actual difference between knowing a language and speaking a language?
Well, knowing it is mental, speaking it is physical.
Yes. Knowing the phrases is just a cognitive exercise. You can know all the phrases in the world, but speaking them out loud is a physical, athletic action.
An athletic action. I really like that. We forget that the vocal tract, the jaw, the tongue, the lips, the diaphragm is basically a physical instrument.
It absolutely is. And shadowing bridges the gap between the mind and that physical instrument.
So how does it actually work?
Shadowing is the practice of listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say almost simultaneously, typically with only a fraction of a second delay.
Wait, clarify that. You aren't pausing the audio, repeating it, and then playing the next part.
No pausing. You are tracking them in real time, exactly like an echo.
Like an echo, you don't wait for them to finish the sentence at all.
Exactly. As soon as they start speaking, you start speaking. You mirror their intonation, their stress on certain syllables, the rhythm of their speech, and the way they link words together.
But why is the simultaneous part so crucial? Why not just listen, hit pause, and repeat normally? That seems a whole lot easier for a beginner.
It is easier, but it's far less effective. Because when you hit pause and repeat from memory, you automatically default to your native accent and your native speaking rhythm.
Oh, because the audio isn't playing anymore, so your brain takes over?
Right. You read the phrase from your short-term memory, and your brain applies the phonetic rules of your first language to the English words. You literally end up practicing your own mistakes.
Wow, so you're reinforcing your own accent instead of the native one.
But when you shadow simultaneously, you simply do not have time to think. Your brain is entirely occupied with mimicking the acoustic reality of the native speaker.
You are bypassing your native language filters completely because you're so busy keeping up.
Exactly. It's pure imitation. It builds actual muscle memory in your face.
You're physically training your vocal tract to produce the specific sounds of English effortlessly rather than intellectually thinking about how to pronounce a word.
It transforms passive listening into an active, high-intensity linguistic workout. And more importantly, you're learning the melody of the language.
The melody.
Yes, which is crucial for English. English is what linguists call a stress-timed language.
Stress-timed. Okay, as opposed to what?
As opposed to a syllable-timed language like Spanish or Japanese, where every syllable gets roughly the same amount of time and emphasis.
Oh, I see.
In English, the rhythm is dictated by the stressed syllables, not by the number of syllables. Native speakers rush through the unimportant words like to, for, the, and they slow down to emphasize the key nouns and verbs.
Right. A native speaker doesn't say, I would like to go to the store. They say, I'd like to go to the store. The little words just get squished together.
Exactly. They get completely compressed. Non-native speakers often struggle to sound natural, and they often sound very robotic because they try to give equal weight and equal time to every single word.
Which feels unnatural to an English ear, so shadowing forces you to physically feel those natural peaks and valleys of a native sentence.
You literally feel where the speaker rushes, where they blend words together, and where they slow down.
And I want to highlight the final two words of the source text here because I think they're deeply important. With us.
Yatta with us.
Yeah. The instruction isn't to shadow, it's shadow with us. That implies a guided, supportive environment, which changes the dynamic entirely.
It really does. If you tell a learner to just go shadow a random news broadcast or a fast-paced Hollywood movie, it's terrifying.
It's way too fast, the vocabulary's too complex, and they'll probably just give up in 3 minutes.
To shadow with us means the creators of this lesson are providing a curated, properly paced environment.
They're essentially acting as your personal phonetic trainers. It provides psychological safety.
You aren't alone. You have expert guides pacing you through this specific cafe conversation. The combination of these 4 elements is just devastatingly effective.
Let's look at how they all stack together. First, the story gives you the emotional context and lowers your stress wall.
Second, the cafe setting gives you the highly transferable, practical application of transactional and social language.
Third, the phrases give you the cognitive chunks you need to avoid translation lag and completely eliminate those filler words.
And finally, the shadowing gives you the physical muscle memory to deliver those phrases flawlessly with a natural rhythm.
It's basically a complete closed-loop system for fluency. You aren't leaving anything to chance.
It guarantees that you aren't merely absorbing information on a theoretical level, but actively converting that information into a tangible physical skill that you can deploy under pressure.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Let's synthesize everything we've discovered in this deep dive.
The source material we analyzed today was incredibly brief.
Really brief, just a topic, a title, and a visual overlay. But as we've seen, it isn't just a simple throwaway lesson. It is a highly engineered 4-part blueprint for total language mastery.
It addresses every single major barrier a non-native speaker faces. It removes the paralyzing stress of grammar memorization.
It provides immediate real-world utility that you can use today. It eradicates the mental hesitation that leads to ums and is.
And it builds the physical confidence needed to actually open your mouth and speak.
We started by understanding how to contextualize information with a story, creating deep memory hooks that outlast any flashcard.
We grounded that story in a universally relatable setting, the cafe, to practice high-utility structural language.
Language that transfers to the boardroom just as easily as the coffee shop. We focused heavily on acquiring complete pre-assembled phrases to build fluency bridges and bypass the mental translation delay.
And finally, we explored how to build actual physical muscle memory through conversation practice and real-time shadowing.
For a learner seeking an accessible, frictionless path to fluency, avoiding information overload is the absolute most critical factor for success. If you're overwhelmed, you just quit.
But this exact framework provides absolute laser-like focus. It eliminates all the unnecessary friction.
You don't need a 1,000-page textbook. You don't need to memorize the dictionary. You just need a compelling story, high-utility phrases, and the dedication to physically shadow the speakers.
The source provided us with a visual overlay that simply says, Café Story. It's a lens through which you view the language.
It's your training ground. But here's a final, provocative thought to chew on as you move forward.
Once you master this specific shadowing technique,
Yeah, and once you fundamentally understand how to build your speech using pre-assembled phrase chunks instead of isolated words, this framework becomes infinitely scalable.
you're no longer restricted to just the cafe. You own the methodology.
Exactly. What other overlays can you apply this master key to? If you can master the cafe story, can you sit down and build your own office story for your next big meeting?
Or can you construct your own airport story for your travels? Or a supermarket story?
The mechanics you learn here remain identical. The phrase chunking, the shadowing, the structural skeletons, they never change. The world itself simply becomes a massive living script for you to practice, shadow, and ultimately master.
You take the blueprint, you drop the stress, and you apply it to whatever environment you need to conquer next.